I'm Joyce Daly. I'm one of the co-chairs this year of the Pulitzer Prize Board. And it's my deep pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for this special evening, Danielle Allen. Danielle is exactly the right person to speak to us tonight as we celebrate the 2016 Pulitzer winners and their addition to a century of excellence in journalism, literature, and music. Danielle is a scholar, a writer, a teacher, a reader, a journalist, and a poet. Danielle believes in the power of words and in democracy. She once, in fact, told an interviewer that she has loved democracy for a long time, since I was a kid, she said. And since I'm sharing stories about Danielle's childhood, here's another. 7 years old, and her family took a long trip abroad, and she was told that she could take 2. I knew that they would just last me longer. She was already a discerning and perceptive reader. Let's flash forward, though, to today. Danielle directs Harvard's Edmond J. Safra Center for Ethics. She's a professor of government and in the Graduate School of Education there. She's a political theorist who is highly regarded for her scholarship on justice and citizenship in modern America and in ancient Athens. Her recent work focuses on political equality and the importance of a humanities education to political participation. She has a doctorate in classics from the University of Cambridge and a doctorate in government from Harvard. For several years, she was on the faculty of the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, and that's been the intellectual home for many of the century's greatest thinkers, including Albert Einstein. She earlier taught at the University of Chicago. She was the Dean of Humanities there, and she started a poetry series. Because you see, Danielle is also an expert in 20th century American poetry. She's written 5 books, co-edited 2 more, and she has another book coming out next year. Her second book, Talking to Strangers, Anxieties of Citizenship Since Brown versus the Board of Education, was cited by the MacArthur Foundation in 2001 when it awarded her a Genius Grant. She was just 29. Danielle's 2014 book, Our Declaration, a reading of the Declaration of Independence in Defense of Equality, was widely praised by scholars and mainstream reviewers alike. The Society of American Historians awarded it the Francis Parkman Prize, calling it, quote, a book of learned ideas conveyed in luminous prose with a sure arc and glistening with vividness, clarity, empathy, narrative power, and explanatory force. The New York Review of Books said it was a tour de force, and all Princeton freshmen this year were required to read it. You might know this as well. Danielle is a prolific and provocative contributing columnist for the Washington Post. She chairs the Mellon Foundation Board and is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the American Philosophical Society. And as you heard earlier, Danielle is a past chair of the Pulitzer Prize Board. So Danielle led the board in 2014 when it came time for us to finalize the plans for the centennial. She urged us to be ambitious, to stimulate conversations across the nation about the values exemplified by Pulitzer-winning work. She especially urged us to inspire younger generations. So, trusting Danielle's leadership and vision, the Pulitzer Board, staff, and our many committed partners, and many Pulitzer winners, including those in this room, took on her challenge. As a result, we've seen citizens from Alabama to Washington, including, I'm sure, young Ernest Daniels out there, as they've reached for their favorite poetry, made music, tried out journalism, told their stories, and we hope, felt some love for democracy and their place within it. Danielle also is a friend, and I'm very, very thrilled to welcome her to the stage right now. Please help me thank her and welcome her to the stage. Danielle.
I would say thank you to Joyce, but I sort of wish she'd lowered expectations. Like, I don't know, maybe my history of sexual predations or something like that, something to lower expectations. Good evening. It's an honor to be here. Good evening, President Bollinger. Pleasure to see you. Members of the Pulitzer Prize Board, past and present, prize winners, winners of the 2016 prize, agents, editors, publishers, it's a room full here, friends, family, demon lovers, I know you're out there, who have lifted up this year's prize winners. What has brought us together under the grand dome of Low Library on this gray, wet October evening? In 1911, Joseph Pulitzer died on his yacht, leaving a will, mental note, remember, try that one. He left a will that bequeathed to posterity a School of Journalism and the illustrious prizes, both housed here at Columbia University. As you know, the first prizes were awarded in 1917. This makes you, the winners here assembled, the 100th cohort of honorees. We are here to celebrate you, yes, but also to conjure up an oasis of reflection. Life expectancies may be lengthening, but a 100th birthday party isn't yet an everyday occurrence. So let's ask, is there some accumulated wisdom in a century's worth of award-winning work? 2 years ago, in the fall of 2014, the Pulitzer Board dug through its archive, scouting out enduring lessons. We also recognized that our centennial would coincide with a presidential election year. As you've heard, we settled on 4 broad themes for public convenings: social justice and equality, the presidency, the people, and the press, power, accountability, and abuse, and finally, war, migration, and the quest for a more peaceful world. These have been permanent themes in the Pulitzer Archive. They turned out also to be prescient themes for 2016. 2 years ago, the Black Lives Matter movement was just getting off the ground and hadn't yet hit prime time. We were 6 months away from the Obergefell ruling. The Snowden revelations were just out. The Syrian refugee crisis was well on its way to its present massive proportions, but as of then, still unacknowledged by the American public. The presidential campaigns have plowed all these fields, and the overheated arguments have been punctuated by a staccato of terror attacks and deaths of and by the police. Running alongside all of this, around the country, prize winners and loyal readers of newspapers and novels gathered to discuss the centennial themes. Again and again, the same pattern emerged. Pulitzer winners exhibit powerful intelligence, trained to find meaning even in chaos. They display physical and moral courage and compassion. They refuse shortcuts. Los Angeles Times photographer Carolyn Cole told the story of running into Bethlehem's Church of the Nativity to cover a siege against Palestinian militants. Everyone else was headed out. We traveled back to the Vietnam War for perspectives that deepen the war's moral complexity, thanks to historian Frederick Logevall and novelist Viet Thanh Nguyen. Sarah Ghanem, a 2012 winner for the Patriot News in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, shared tales of her after-hours and weekends pursuit of the truth about Jerry Sandusky. New York Times executive editor Dean Baquet vowed that he would risk jail in order to print leaked tax returns from Donald Trump, and so much more. It would, though, be too easy to congratulate ourselves for having laid a timely table for much-needed conversation. In fact, our prescience was limited. In one early centennial planning meeting, we batted around anticipated scenarios for the election year. One colleague predicted that Jeb Bush would easily secure the Republican nomination. I disagreed. I thought something was afoot, that the race might get shaken up. I suggested that the man to watch was Rand Paul. All right? Okay, so none of us really saw what was coming. Why not? Here's my hypothesis. We didn't see what was coming because we, the community of readers, are now members of a cultural minority. According to data from Pew, as recently as 2005, the majority of adult Americans with high school degrees and above were daily readers of newspapers. This is no longer true. Currently, at best, about 40% of adult Americans frequently get news from the family of Pulitzer organizations, whether in print or digital form. In contrast, 57% of adult Americans frequently get news from television in all its formats. For those of our papers that remain, the absolute number of readers, both print and digital, has increased since the print-only days. But the share of the population that regularly partakes of text is shrinking. On average, people now give 20 minutes of weekend leisure time to reading. They give adults, not kids, 3¼ hours to television. In the 18 months leading up to the official start of the campaign, we readers failed to register the country's pulse. I think this is because we weren't tracking the whole public conversation. We weren't even tracking the greater part. Our attention was elsewhere, and this is plain even from the Pulitzer Plan of Award. To quote the prize's FAQ document, broadcast media and their websites are ineligible in all categories. With these words, the board a few years ago made explicit what had been an implicit, long-standing, though not permanent, practice. We are trying to navigate the shifting landscape of media convergence, still trying to use problematic terms like broadcast. And for all kinds of reasons, we essentially chose to look away from media that self-identify as television. Our averted gaze would perhaps have minimal impact if the majority of Americans still read newspapers and news sites daily, but surely it's a different story when we, the devotees of text, are in the minority. Okay. By now, I may seem to have strayed in these remarks too far into political terrain, the politics of the prizes, the politics of the country. But I do this out of a sense of urgency. Let me quote the poet William Carlos Williams from a poem called Asphodel. My heart rouses, thinking to bring you news of something that concerns you, and concerns many men. Look at what passes for new. You will not find it there, but in despised poems. It is difficult to get the news from poems, yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there. Our new status as a cultural minority requires our direct attention. To color its significance, it helps, I think, to return to Joseph Pulitzer's vision. He wrote, "Our republic and its press will rise or fall together. An able, disinterested, public-spirited press with trained intelligence to know the right and courage to do it can preserve that public virtue without which popular government is a sham and a mockery. A cynical, mercenary, demagogic press will produce in time a people as base as itself." The brilliance of Joseph Pulitzer's plan for the prizes was the decision to wed what in the early 20th century would have been seen as high with low, literature and scholarship with, sorry guys, journalism. The taproot and rootlets of Pulitzer's papers lay among ordinary people, working people, and not only professionals. In the words of Seymour Topping, former administrator of the prizes, Pulitzer appealed to the public to accept that his paper was their champion. This populist appeal was effective, circulation mounted, and the paper prospered. With the prizes, Pulitzer ensured that poets and composers and dramatists would win audiences beyond what they could otherwise dream of. He also guaranteed that audiences reading papers like his would extend their education. The gift Pulitzer gave us was the chance to dissolve boundaries between the supposedly elite culture of writing salons and universities and the broad culture of all Americans. The solvent was the newsroom. Pulitzer offered an inclusive vision that invited all to partake of the richness of word, image, and sound. With this deepening of everyone's education, readers would grow ever hungrier for high standards in their journalism. Newspapers would be the people's champions, but the people would learn how to ask their champions for noble advocacy. At their best, the Pulitzer Prizes establish a virtuous circle of mutual improvement among writers, musicians, scholars, journalists, and people from all backgrounds. Reading, not just of newspapers, was the link. So should we aspire to reverse the trend of declining readership? Of course, I think. Fine examples of television journalism abound, but Pulitzer winners especially carry a torch for the highest standards of truth-telling, analysis, and social investigation. Perhaps I merely favor my own tribe, but I would be cheered to see these standards for use of evidence, precision in argumentation, originality and concision in writing spread through the whole of our cultural fabric. In our own centennial celebration, as you've heard, we took up the mission of broadening audiences for our winners' remarkable work. This feature of our centennial year is what makes us proudest. As you've heard, in partnership with 46 of the country's state and territorial humanities councils, we sponsored 220 campfire events of amazing diversity and power around the country. The Iowa Center for Public Affairs Journalism broadcast an interview with 1997 winner Michael Gardner on 19 different radio stations in Iowa. In Washington, D.C., the soul of the City Youth Leadership Program enabled 50 public high school students to learn and practice journalism under the guidance of Pulitzer winners. When 2,000 students gathered for the National High School Journalism Annual Convention in Los Angeles this year, many Pulitzer winners contributed to the proceedings. Every one of you, all of you who have won this year here in this room, and your predecessors, others of you here too who have won prizes in the past, each and every one of you is a shining example of Pulitzer's ideals: a trained intelligence, courage, craft, and dedication. I hope you will therefore pardon me for also saying this. An even greater inspiration lies in what we found with our Campfires initiative. Throughout the country, despite the trends in reading, there is actually a powerful hunger for your work, for hard-hitting journalism, moving fiction, unsettling drama, and spirit-lifting song. It's time to think big again. It's time for all the writers here assembled and for this family of news organizations to reach even harder. I know you've been reaching, but even harder for the audiences who have fallen away. As the journalists of the future do so, may they, like our predecessors, forge bonds among themselves, the people, and the poets. Along this path, I think, lies hope. Thank you.